Professor Lugovsky, it's great to see you today.
Very nice to see you too, Jason.
So, Professor, you teach economics at Indiana University, and you follow what's going on with Russia and its economy. And the news coming out of Russia isn't looking very positive. What are you seeing?
Right, so it depends on which side you are, and so you can think of them as positive or negative news. But so yes, Russian economy is experiencing major negative impacts. So there are multiple kind of events in the world which are affecting Russia negatively. So as we know, Russia finances its budget by more than 1/3 from its export revenue from energy. And so oil prices went down significantly because of Saudi Arabia's increased its supply, and the United States is expected to increase its supply. So that's bad news. On the top of that, Russia has been sanctioned, and so European countries already barely buying Russian energy. And so India and China are the main consumer these days, so they demand high discounts for Russian energy. And so this might worsen even more for Russia, right? So we are discussing now this new package of sanctions, which is already has support of 82 senators, and so Lindsey Graham is behind it, advocating it a lot. And so the idea is that now you'll be taxing consumers of Russian energy, right? So just instead of trying to catch all these like shadow fleet and do other things, you just see who buys Russian energy and you impose high tariffs on those guys. And so then they would either stop buying Russian energy, or in return they will demand even higher discounts, right? And so sanctions are still in the works, but just the fact that so sanctions may be imposed has already collapsed their stock market, right? So the major firms have lost between 2 to 4%. So that includes major gas and oil exporters and metal exporters, and the company which provides transportation, right? So Sovcomflot, which basically is the monopoly, almost monopoly company in charge of transporting Russian energy to foreign countries.
So, despite all of this, Russia claims things are going great. In fact, just yesterday they said that their economy is the fourth largest in the world and that they are spending tons of money. For instance, the Russian national budget, about half of it goes to defense. But why is that not the case? Why are things not as great as Russia would like to claim they are? And why is, say, spending 5 million bucks on a tank different than the government spending 5 million bucks on building a road, or the private sector spending $5 million in development?
So Russia is a country with one of the strongest propaganda these days in the world. So they spend also significant amount of money on projecting themselves as the strong country with a strong military and GDP. So it's not surprising that they self-proclaim themselves to be the fourth economy in the world. But like nobody who is serious believes in that. Plus, even whatever the numbers we are discussing, right? So these expenditures on military at the time of war is very different than from expenditures on anything else in a typical economy, right? So if, for example, the United States were to expend its expenditures on infrastructure or on the production of airplanes, or on the production of cars, right? So we expect these things to serve to us for maybe like 5, 10, 15 years. And so in this case, this is a significant input into GDP for years to come. In the Russian case, if you are building a tank and then you announce that the price of this tank is $5 million because sometime in the past you sold a few of those to foreign countries at $5 million. So A, doesn't mean that those countries will buy these tanks at such quantity at $5 million. So potentially the price will be already lower. But second, the life expectancy of these tanks can be just within a month. And so this will be destroyed immediately, right? So think about, if you were to think about normal economy, that would correspond to extremely high depreciation rate, right? And so that's why you'd be building tanks over and over again, replenishing those which were burned. And it's not the same as contributing to economy with normal durable goods. right? So it's basically a wasted effort.
Well, there certainly does seem to be other secondary signals that things are not going so well in Russia. And in fact, despite very high inflation, it seems there's a problem with liquidity. You might have seen recently there was a news story that over 2 million Russians, out of about 28 million Russians who have credit cards, 2 million of them said they were not going to be able to pay back their credit cards. That's a pretty large number, 2 out of 28. But more than that, there was a story that came out that the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which is like the police in Russia, was looking at ways or even prohibiting the giving of personal loans by banks. Why would that be? And what do these different things, these different tea leaves, signal to us?
So indeed, that's a very large number, right? So if you think about 7% of their economically active population which use credit cards have defaulted, right? So 7%. So now if you start collecting, if you start announcing them bankrupt, right? So this will be a significant number of people. And you can expect even maybe civil unrest, especially if these numbers are to grow, right? So why is it collapsing in such great numbers? So that's also not surprising. Consumer credit rates in Russia vary between 25 and 50%, which is normal given that the central bank of Russia has a rate over 20%, right? So these are market rates. But then to pay close to 50% of interest rate per year as extremely difficult, so it's a very risky loan. So it's not surprising that many would default, right? And so Russia understand that. And so instead of regulating the inflation, which is beyond their control, so they can announce whatever numbers they want, but the financing rate of banks of 25 to 50% basically shows that it's very high, would basically say, look, we don't want to deal with these problems of inflation. We don't want to have civil unrest because many consumers will bankrupt and many small businesses will bankrupt. So we'll just do this Soviet-style measure and we just forbid all the consumer credits, right? So think it's equivalent in the United States. All of a sudden, you forbid all the credit cards, right? So you can only use debit cards or cash, right? And so what happens in that case, you artificially decreasing demand for money. And so that might be even seen by some people as a positive news because that would be decreasing the inflation pressure because people will be taking less money and spending less money. But from the perspective of the entire economy, that's actually generating even bigger problem because now you have liquidity problem, right? So you have something which you need to fix immediately, right? So you need to call a plumber and you cannot because you cannot pay him. And so then it destroys your apartment, right? And so that's much more expensive than if you were able to take this credit to fix your plumbing system and not to have flooding in your apartment, right? And so there are many, many examples like that where will be announcing bankruptcy and creating big economic problems for Russians and small businesses, even at larger scale, compared to the fact if you were allowed to default them, but still not to have such severe liquidity problem. So I think it's a very bad step if it were to be implemented in Russia. And so it seems that they're now discussing it and with high probabilities they may implement it. And part of that is also because you have different entities responsible for different things. So somebody says, oh, I don't want to see inflation high, and I don't care how the rest of the economy functions, right? So that's the problem of somebody else. And then police would say, I don't want to deal with collection. I don't want to deal with civil unrest. So if there's some liquidity problem, again, it will be somebody else's problem, right? So they would always try to avoid responsibility and just to fix some small thing, which will look at these bureaucrats better, and they don't care what happens to the rest.
So civil unrest becomes more and more real. Let me ask you just one last question. Overall, looking at all the economic data that there is, would you say that you're bearish or would you say that you're bullish about the Russian economy going ahead?
So Russian economy has been declining for now like few years, and so this trend will continue. So the question if I'm bearish or if I'm even more bearish than before. And so potentially I'm even more bearish than before because these new sanctions can be more effective than many previous rounds of sanctions. Plus, all these problems in Russian economy were accumulating for years, right? So all this departure of labor force, all this, neglecting long-term investments, all this higher rate of mistakes, even in like airlines and other critical industries. So all of this has been accumulating. So it's kind of getting very close to the tipping point when things will start collapse one after another at very fast rate.
Sounds fantastic. It was great speaking with you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jason. It was nice seeing you.